absolutely great to be back with another episode of the Data Transformation series from the Digital Transformation Lab here in University College Cork. My name is Paidi O'Reilly, member of the committee of that group, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have Bill Schmarzo with us today. Myself and Bill have been back and forth over the years. It's years now, I think, Bill, and we never really had the opportunity because of COVID and lots of other things of really meeting up face to face. So this is as close as we got for the moment. Bill, over to you. You are obviously a very well respected member of the data community. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
A bit about myself. So I have been in the data business for a really long time, like over 40 years. And so I have many Forrest Gump moments in my life here, Paidi. And so which has helped to form where I've gotten to. I certainly have strong perspectives on what I think about data and analytics, and especially around the whole idea around data transformation or value transformation driven by data. Currently, I'm teaching at Menlo College in my spare time. I'm at Dell Technologies, where I am the customer data innovation lead, helping develop products around how we help our customers who have this great bounty of data. How do we help them get more value from the data? I like to say that my job and the job of the team is to improve the line of sight from data to value. And that equation starts very easy because everybody understands what data is, but it fails pretty fast because most people don't really understand how they create value. And so I write a lot of blogs. I try to do a blog a week because it allows me a chance to learn. You put a blog out there, I find I get great interaction from people, and I learn a lot from those interactions. And I've written a few books, and so that's kind of me.
Yeah, and a busy man, and I know you're a busy man from a lot of the social media interactions. I see you having, Bill. Let's not count the number of years, but you're obviously in the space for a long number of years at this stage. What sort of trends do you think you've seen over the years? And I think you've even sort of landed on one there, which is that move from data-driven to value-driven. But what other trends have you been seeing?
Well, I think the first part of the data story was so focused on our ability just to generate reports and dashboards. It became a mission unto itself. And while that was useful, it wasn't really actionable from the sense that it would tell me what to do. It told me where I had problems and maybe gave me a clue as to what was causing the problems, but never gave me any predictions or recommendations. And one of the things that's happened over the past 10 or so years is really a strong movement towards moving from reporting to predicting. And organizations are struggling to do that because we have always thought of data as something that IT does sort of in the bowels of the organization, but predicting is what business needs. And so I think the biggest transformation has been the requirement for the data people to be able to talk to the business, and the ability for the business, like I say, is to think like a data scientist, to start understanding, well, what it is that I can get out of data that can help me drive better decisions. So to me, that's been one of the biggest transformation over the many years I've been in this industry, is the fact that we're starting to realize that there is, as we said earlier, there's value in data, but there's only value in data if I can use it to actually drive business or operational outcomes. And so there has been this elevation of the respective that IT and data has had, and it probably gets reflected in the role of the chief data officer, who has transformed quite a bit, right? When the first few chief data officers that came out were basically CIO mini-me's, right? They were CIO type people who had responsibility for the data systems, but they weren't responsible for helping business get value out of data. And now the modern CDO, or the Chief Data Analytics Officer, CDAO, is really about, well, how do the lines of business, how do our business units use data to get more value, to drive more optimized outcomes?
Yeah, no, and look, that introduces so many topics we could land on. But I'm always interested, Bill. I suppose, yeah, we're aiming towards prediction and maybe even prescription, but have we even got to the point of companies, businesses understanding their own business, not to mind going beyond that again in terms of data?
Yeah, that's Paidi. That's a great point. And one of the struggles I wrestle with the companies is I like this to sort of unnerve a chief data officer or a chief information officer by saying, so tell me what your most important data set is,
Mhm.
and see how they respond. Most of them don't know. They don't know what their most important data set is. They don't know what their most valuable data set is, because in many cases they don't know how the organization defines and measures value. And so there is this really, if you don't understand how you define and create value, how do you predict? How do you make predictions that are useful? One of the things that used to always drive me nuts as a data scientist was when somebody comes to me and say, "Here, I got this data set. Tell me what's valuable inside of it." And I would say, "Well, how do you define value? What is value? And more specifically, what are the KPIs and metrics that you're using to measure value creation effectiveness?" I find that when you get down to those KPIs and metrics, and you really want people to say, okay, tell me how you're measuring your value creation processes, the KPIs that the organization tells you how they measure their organization's value creation effectiveness tells you more about their culture than any artificially created mission statement, because you are what you measure. And if you say your employees are really important to you, but you don't have any KPIs across the management team around employee satisfaction and employee retention and employee, growth, then that's a bunch of BS. It's a bunch of BS. And so what a company is all about is defined by their KPIs. And so you get to that conversation and you realize very quickly that organizations haven't done a really good job of thinking more holistically about how they create value, because they think it's a top-down process. Management defines how we create value, when you and I both know that value creation starts at the bottom. It starts with the customers. What's valuable to them? What are they trying to do? What are their journeys? What's their intents? What are the intent? What are the outcomes they're trying to drive? That's where value is created. It doesn't start at the top. It starts at the bottom. And it's hard for organizations to acknowledge the fact that maybe the single most important people in the company aren't the CXO's ranks, but it's the people at the front lines of the organization, people who are either daily interacting with customers or the operations of the business. It's the front lines where value is actually created.
There's a lovely saying, Bill, and I think it ties in really nicely with what you're saying there, which is, culture isn't what it says on the wall; it's what happens down the hall. And it
That's
is
a great
that,
line.
yeah, and I think it's so true. And also I'm struck, Bill. I don't think a lot of people that are in data units understand the value of their data sets, but I'm not sure they understand also what the most important decisions are that the business need to make now and into the future.
Great. So the challenge is, and I'm going to take decisions and group them into use cases, because a use case is basically a series of decisions around a common set of KPIs. And Paidi, I think the problem that organizations run into from a use case perspective isn't that they don't have enough use cases; it's that they got too many. And so the process of identifying, validating value, and prioritizing those use cases becomes a real onerous task, because you got to drive that process across the organization. You need to make sure that everybody, all the stakeholders, have a voice in that identify, validate, value, and prioritize process. Notice this little chart back here. I use this chart all the time with executives, right? We go through, we identify what they think their most important use cases are. And I say, okay, let's figure out where are we going to start? You've got a whole bunch. You got 14, you got 20 use cases. You can't do them all. You can't do them all simultaneously. You're not a big enough, there's not enough people. And by the way, there's all kinds of impediments to building data and analytics reuse when you try to do them all at once. And so you go through a process where you take the stakeholders and you take a flip chart like this, and you go through a process of identifying from a low to high the value criteria. By the way, this whole value conversation gets really interesting again, right? How do you define value? What are the KPIs and metrics, right? Who are the stakeholders, and how do they measure value creation? And then you have this feasibility criteria. And I usually like to say this is 18 to 24 months at most, ideally 12 to 18 months. If I don't have any time limit on this, then any problem solvable. But if I got to solve something in 12 to 18 months, now I have a frame around which I can start to prioritize, well, which of these use cases, how do they map to this? And maybe the most important thing is when you get the people around a board, which is hard to do sometimes when you have 20, 25 executives, is to debate, why is A more valuable than B? Why is F, which is our single most valuable initiative, why is it so infeasible? And you can have these conversations where people can have a chance to have a voice. They can express their concerns. They can express their optimism, what they want to achieve, and have debate. Because in debate, in that structure of conflict is where innovation happens. That is when you get that stuff out. Now all of a sudden you got some basis for driving some innovation. Some of that, instead of this or that, you have that this and that conversation, which really then starts to break free a lot of the thinking, the sort of the boxed in thinking that people have when they start thinking about where and how I apply data and analytics to drive my business use cases.
Mm-hmm. And like for the sake, and not just the sake of being provocative, because I think that it's also quite close to reality from my experience, Bill, is you're really now calling out a whole set of capabilities that traditionally may not have been in sort of IT, engineering sorts of areas, data science, I would even say. Do you think that's true?
Yeah. Oh, I think it's, this is why I teach this class, The Art of Thinking Like a Data Scientist, because I think the business stakeholders are the ones who are in the best position to figure out where and how they can use data and analytics to either reinvent their business processes or transform their business models. And so for the business people to be able to have that kind of conversation, they need to have a fundamental understanding of what can you do with data and analytics? What are the capabilities? What are the things? Now, we don't want them to have to write a neural network. That would be silly, right? But they should understand some very basic concepts around what data science does so they can apply them to their business. One of the things I always talk about that I think a lot of organizations struggle with is this concept I call nanoeconomics. Right? Nanoeconomics is the economic theory of individualized entity, predicted behavioral and performance propensities. So entities would be people, customers, nurses, patients, technicians, devices. It could be compressors and motors and engines and such. But we can build very individualized profiles on every one of our customers, understanding what products do they like and what do they tend to buy and what do they buy together, how often do they come and who do they come with. We can leverage all these details. We can actually start to uncover what their intentions are so that we can better serve them. But we do that on an individualized basis. And instead of making decisions based on averages, that on average customers like this, on average customers like that, we get down to say, well, this is the pack of customers here that actually like this kind of a product. These are the kind of customers here who want to go on this kind of vacation, right? So we can get down to that. And this is one of those Forrest Gump moments for me here, Patty, when I was at Yahoo and realized that we had 500 million visitors a day coming to our sites, and we had a fraction of a second to figure out what ad to show them. Right? Well, what we did is we looked at everything that they had done, their entire journey, what sites they'd gone to, what they'd clicked on, what they didn't click on, what videos they viewed, what they liked, what they shared, what keywords they went, and we used all that trying to determine what's their intentions. What are they trying to do? What are they interested in? Interested in vacations, cars, digital cameras? And then when they came to our site, then if we knew what their intention was, we could know, oh, this is the ad we're going to show them. This is where we're going to place it and blah, blah, blah. But we could get down to that individualized level so we could give everybody an individualized experience because we could build individualized scores on each of their propensities. Mm-hmm. To me, that was the real aha moment for me. And when you start getting business people to stop thinking about making decisions based on averages, but get very granular and how we can make individualized, hyper-personalized experiences, it becomes very transformational for the business.
I think that's powerful, Bill, and I know some would argue that the days of averages and means are gone. They were the days when we didn't have the data or we didn't have the processing power, whereas we do now. To get in, and also that let's say if we're looking at recommendation engines, the recommendations engine don't give the recommendations for an average person. They give the recommendations specific to us, and now there's nearly the expectation, some call it the liquid expectation, that we're going to get that same experience in all parts of our life, that people and systems adjust to us. So I really like that. Bill, how do we get, because we're talking a bit about maybe democratizing the skills of data science into the business, and maybe we're also starting to point out some of the traditional deficiencies in data units where they don't have some of those business skills, the soft skills. How, like you're a man with a lot of experience in different organizations. How do we get these groups to work together? What does a data science team now look like?
So and this will be no surprise to you, Paidi, is that I believe that all my data science teams have a design thinker on them. I always put a design thinker because I think what design thinking does, a lot of things that design thinking does, but one of the things it does, there's tools and techniques for giving everybody a voice. I like to say that, one of the things is that, all ideas are worthy of consideration. That you can get everybody, you can liberate that ideation, you can democratize, brainstorming, so that even somebody who is, the lowest ranking person in the room might have the best idea. And by the way, that word might, right? That word might is just probably the most powerful word we have in our language. Because we can say, well, this might work. We can try this, right? This ability to have an idea that might work and then try and see if it works and learn from that, try and try again, right? Because if it's an organization, if you don't have enough might moments, you'll never have any breakthrough moments. So you've got to nurture those might moments. And so so I bring design thinkers into my process because I think design thinking is such a powerful liberation, cultural transformation capability, especially when you couple it with data science. And let me give you a really simple, fundamental example of why it's critical that you leverage something like design thinking to bring the business stakeholders and the data scientists together, because there's a process in the data science process called feature engineering. Feature engineering is where you're trying to identify those variables and metrics that might be better predictors of performance. The people who are going to have the best ideas of what those variables and metrics are going to be ain't the data scientists. It's the business people. They're working and talking to customers. You're saying, so what customers, you talk to customers, are there any sort of things that give you indication about when they might want to leave, when they're going to trite, when they're unhappy, right? That they can tell you things that they'll do this, they'll do that, we'll see this, right? This whole idea of building better ML and AI models is very much contingent on our ability to do feature engineering. And you can't do feature engineering if you haven't brought the business stakeholders in and liberated their ability to ideate. And so it's this art of thinking like a data scientist is also the art of unleashing that curiosity that's inside of all of our business stakeholders to help us think about these variables and metrics against which we can try to figure out how do we drive and predict better performance.
Wow. And I love, the focus on the word might, and it reminds me of the focus on the word yet within a growth mindset build, that, and there's some people that will naturally sort of, I call it surf towards the wave, that go into those spaces of might and yet, and others don't really want to. Do you feel something like that growth mindset, that you need people that are willing to sort of move into the unknown, into the darkness is an important skill?
Yeah, and it's really, you have to have a growth mindset. At least my humble opinion, my view of it is that you have to have a senior management team that's willing to let go, is willing to push decisions, the authority to make decisions to the lowest point in the organization, and empower people to be wrong. Now, being wrong isn't bad as long as you're learning when you're wrong. As long as, I used to always, people on my team would come to me and say, hey, they want my advice on a decision to make. And I'd say, do you know what decision to make? They say, well, yeah, I have a recommendation. I said, have you thought through all the different variables, the cost of the decision being wrong? Yeah, I have. Okay, you make the decision. There's only one requirement. Whatever the decision is, whether it's good or bad, you share what you learn with the rest of the team. You have to push the decision-making authority, responsibility, and empowerment to as low in the organization as possible, but then you have to open up a channel where you can share the learnings across those decisions. Some are going to be good, some are going to be wrong. You're going to make wrong decisions, but it isn't a mistake. A mistake is not a failure if you learn something from it, right? So you can because life is about failing a lot. And it's really hard in this growth mindset to allow people to fail, but intelligently fail, and fail in a way where you're learning from that. So a lot of organizations are really doomed, unfortunately, because they still think that the best organizational structure is, boxes, organizational boxes. And I'm a big believer in what I call swirls. I like this idea of what I call organizational improvisation, where you can bring people together to solve a problem. You can leverage this different skill sets, the fact the diverse skill sets they have to solve a problem, and that team can then break up and go someplace else. But you never lose that operational integrity as you mix and match these people, because you've gotten these people at the lowest level in the organization who have skill sets who are actually can combine and drive things. Again, that means that if you have boxes and this person in this box here never talks to this person in this box here because that box in a different line in this box, then you're never going to get that synergy of ideas, of ideation. So again, I'd hate growth mindsets encourage swirls. They can come together, solve problems, drive ideation, and create that synergy of not just 1 + 1 = 3, but 1 + 1 = 7,000, 7 million, 7 billion. You create all these new ideas.
Yeah, and again, it's very close to some of the work we're doing as well. Build, this idea of empowering smaller teams, But I think a big issue all the time is how can you build the trust among the senior leaders for them to devolve some of that decision making down to teams. So let's say you're coming into a new organization. How do you build trust in you yourself, but also in a data-driven approach to decision making?
Well, I have two things how you build trust. Number one is transparency. So people have to understand what you're doing and have to be clear that there are no secondary agendas, right? Being very transparent about what we're doing. Here's why we're doing this. But the real litmus test is what happens. How does the senior manager react when you make a bad decision, when you fail? Do they scream and yell and try to pull power back? God help us, they do that. It isn't like the senior person is God. Right? It's like they're flawless. They're not going to make any bad decisions. They just seem to somehow sometimes forget the fact that they do make bad decisions. But that pushing that down to build that trust, you have to not only say you allow people to fail, but support them when they do, because your actions speak louder than your words. When somebody fails at something, if you reprimand them, if you fire them, if you demote them, the whole experiment's over, because people will see that right away. However, if you ask them to, can you share with us what you've learned? Can you share with us what you would do different next time? Can you share with us how we avoid this in the future? Then it becomes a learning experience. And so what it is these organizations need to learn. We want to create organizations, a culture of continuous learning and adapting, where everybody's learning and adapting. And that means you have to push authority down, because it can't just be the senior executives who are learning and adapting, because they don't do anything. They're not selling product. They're not serving coffee. They're not operating on the patient. That's a bunch of BS. So it's got to happen to the lowest parts of the organization. It reminds me of watching. I used to play jazz trumpet in college, and I love a great jazz quartet. And I love how when they're riffing and how smooth and fluid things seem to be. But being a jazz trumpet player, I know when they make mistakes. I'm like, well, didn't hit that one right. You know what? If you don't fail, you don't learn. And a lot of times these jazz musicians will try something. They'll try a new riff, right? Try see if that works. Oh, didn't work. You know what? If you didn't try it, you'd never know if it didn't work or not. We need to have that same mentality so that we can liberate that ideation, innovation power that's buried in the organization.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's a fascinating conversation, Bill, because I know what I see is that in organizations where maybe there's a greater fear of failure, very often data ends up just justifying the operational engine. It's their performance. It's literally driving performance. Whereas it's only when you release some of that fear that people start to use data to explore and to transform. And I that really talks to me, the point you're making. The other thing I'm interested in, because I keep on looking at the diagram behind you as well. I think, Bill, is that sometimes this concept of the big easy, when you're new into a unit, a data unit, what are those projects that can create the biggest impact that are probably easiest to achieve? And I think your diagram behind you talks so much towards that as well. Can we prove and can we demonstrate so that we build trust for then the exploring?
The interesting thing about this feasibility column, it's a great point, Paidi, is that feasibility isn't just, is the data ready? Do we have the right technical skills? A lot of the feasibility, in fact, the bigger part of feasibility is culture. Can you find somebody in the organization? So let's say you're brand new organization. By the way, I hear this story a lot, right? I'll back up a second. So I talked to a lot of CIOs and CDOs, and I hear a lot of the same stories from them. Two problems they've got. Number one, my data lake is broken. I say, broken? I mean, like you turn it on and lights don't come on? What do you mean it's broken? It's right, doesn't physically work. And then the second one is I can't get any value out of my data lake. And I go, same problem, different sides of the same coin, right? Broken means you're not getting value from it. And what happens is that because there's a lack of willingness to go through this process here to really identify what are the most important use cases and use those use cases to tell you what data is most important. What they do is they create a data lake and they throw 30 to 40 different data sets out there, put it all in the data lake. They open the doors and say, users, have at it. Crickets, right? No one comes to it. And so the key is not only do you go through a process like this, but you find somebody in the organization, a friendly, I call them, who really wants to use data not as a shield, but like you gave a great example. Some people use data as an organizational shield to protect themselves. I want to find those people who want to use data as a growth vehicle. Find that friendly, somebody who's in a growth mode, has this growth mindset, who says, my business looks like this, but I believe if I could apply data and analytics, I could take it from here to here. That's who I want to work with. I got to tell you this great story. Sorry, I'm going to go off on a tangent here, Paidi. So I'm sitting in a meeting working with a large agricultural technology company and doing a presentation to the C-level. And I make this statement that there are a lot of analysts who believe that with IoT and the edge, that there'll soon be more data at the edge than at the cloud. And there was this, I just pause a second and you can see the management team looking at each other and they're going like, well, how are we going to manage all that data at the edge? And then one person in the room said, wait a second, no, he goes, that's the wrong question. He goes, how are we going to monetize all that data at the edge? I knew who my friendly was. I knew exactly who I was going to corral and lead the charge. This person wasn't using data as we're going to manage it and shield it. No, this person was saying that data is a weapon. We're going to weaponize it to drive new value, to drive growth. So I'm not sure where I was going with that point, but
yeah, I know exactly where you're going. And I think it's a very well made point, Bill. And it actually also reminds me, in the last day or two, there's been again a lot of talk in Europe about a new data act, they're calling it. But one of the stats that I saw that where they were justifying this need for looking at data differently was something like, is it 70 to 80% of industrial data is never used. And they think it's going to explode even further with the IoT, etc. So again, there's so much untapped potential. And it reminds me of a question, Bill. Can data change the cultures of organizations? So we normally talk about data-driven culture, but can data change the culture of organizations? Sometimes we say it's only when we start to see new things that or when we start to look in new ways, we start to see new things. Does data allow us to become something new?
Can data change the culture? No. Can insights buried in the data change the culture? Maybe. If the application of the insights buried in the data to drive new sources of customer, product, service, and operational value change the culture, definitely. So I love the question, because there's no value in holding data. In fact, data is a cost. It's a liability, right? If you got data and it gets broken into and stolen, you're going to be so. Data itself is this dead asset laying out there that's actually worth nothing and actually costs more. It's like having an oil stain on your driveway, right? It's like, it's a pain. You got to get rid of it. Uncovering the insights buried in the data about your customers, about your products, your services, and your operations, that's the source of value. But not understanding how you're going to apply that to actually create value from a customer stakeholder perspective is the missing link. So I don't think data can change the culture, but I think you can change a culture in how organizations use the insights buried in the data to drive new sources of value. That can change a culture.
Yeah, and I agree completely. And I need to, and not that you've asked me to, because you haven't, Bill, but I need to just refer back to your latest book. I think, is this the third of three books?
It's my fourth one.
Four.
Yeah.
Sorry. So
my third one's kind of a hidden book. It's called the I have it right nearby, right? The Art of Thinking Like a Data Scientist. This is I only sell this on my website because I wanted to keep the price really low, because all my students use this book. It's the process we go through to think like a data scientist, to bring together the collaboration. And so I teach this class not only to business MBA classes, but more and more I'm teaching it to engineering classes as well. So this is my third book, and everybody sort of forgets about this book because it's.
So if you pivot on that, Bill, is there not another book? How do you get a data scientist to think like a design thinker?
Well, there's definitely a book there. I'd argue I wouldn't stop at just getting data scientists to think like design thinkers. I'd work on everybody. I'm a big believer in the power of design thinking. And Paidi, the weird thing about this is probably 6 years ago, I'd never even heard of design thinking. I had no idea what it was.
And what triggered it? What triggered this Damascus moment, Bill?
Our common friend John Morley.
Yeah.
Right. So John was trying to get me to sort of understand the power of design thinking, and I had maybe pretty traditional thinking that, oh, that's about wireframes and user interface and blah blah blah. And he was like, no, Bill, it's more than that. And I was sort of a reluctant rider on this truck, and I was like, no. And so one day he arranged a coffee with one of his friends who's a very senior executive at Google, and a Google data science organization. And of course, anybody who's in data science, you have a lot of respect for what goes on over at Google. And so we had a cup of coffee at my favorite Starbucks, and I asked him, I said, so, I mean, your data science team really seems to hit it on the nose every time. What's the secret to your success? And John knew what the answer was going to be. So John was setting me up, and he said, design thinking. I'm like, UI? He goes, no, Bill. He says, what are you doing on Friday? I said, well, I'm open now. Why? What do you want? He goes, meet me at the Stanford Design School. And let's spend a day understanding what design thinking is all about. I had it all wrong. I had a mindset, which is what we get in problems, right? I had a mindset of what design was about. It's about UI, it's about storyboards, about wireframes. No, design thinking has two aspects to it. It is about user experience. Right, understanding the journey, the customer journey. A customer journey map is one of the most powerful tools I've ever seen. I use it all the time. And by the way, data science blends right into the customer journey map. We've created a template that actually brings those together. Mm-hmm. So I guess I could write a book about that. But anyway, so it is about understanding that customer journey and speaking the language of the customer and making sure that you understand how the customer creates value and the impediments to value. It's all around that value stuff, and it's great. There's also an aspect of design thinking that's about liberating how people think. All ideas are worthy of consideration, giving people, everybody a voice to be wrong, right? A voice to fail. And so to me, design thinking was this massive integration of this ability to really understand how value is defined and created from a customer perspective by the ability to liberate the organization to ideate, and you bring in data science from the bottom and economics from the top. You've truly future-proofed your career when you bring those together. You now have something that is going to survive. We have quantum computing coming. Then we're going to have time warp machines and things like this, right? All kinds of new technologies that are going to come up. But if you have those skill sets, if you have design thinking, you have data science ability to uncover insights in the data, and you have economics, which is the ability to define and create value, you have truly future-proofed your career. You are ready for anything.
No, agreed. And look, it's I suppose you're preaching to the converted to an extent, Bill, but I completely agree with you. So I just want to go back to your latest book, Bill, and I know it's just for anyone.
One.
Yeah. So I've got to call out the name. So there it is. And just in case someone is just listening and not watching, it's The Economies of Data, Analytics, and Digital Transformation. But I was intrigued by the focus, Bill, and I think you've maybe answered this to some extent already in some of the topics we've been talking about, but about this transition from data-driven to value-driven and this value-driven mindset. How do you know when you've reached that nirvana? What does it look like?
I think, good question. I think when you've reached that nirvana when you've not reached the end of the road, and there's always more ideas that you can do. I always get frustrated when I read a report that 42% of people have completed their digital transformation. It's almost a journey that's never completed. If we think about, so I've actually started moving away from the term digital transformation, started using the word cultural transformation, because there's a digital aspect of it. I can build AI and ML models that can continuously learn and adapt. I can build assets using AI and ML, like a Tesla, autonomous vehicle, or John Deere has their autonomous tractors. These things are continuously learning and adapting. I can build policies and procedures using AI and ML that continuously learn and adapt. So I can use that to AI and ML to build this digital transformation that continuously learns and adapts. But the problem is that AI and ML only tends to optimize what I already have built. It optimizes the cow path. But if I can bring in the empowerment of the humans are really good at not only learning and adapting, they're also good at innovating. They're also good at creativity. So while I can optimize with AI and ML on this journey, I can also reinvent by empowering humans to optimize a process and actually reinvent it to really drive that cultural transformation. So the cultural transformation isn't just AI and ML. The cultural transformation isn't just the humans. It's when you bring those two together that you start realizing, now I've gotten to that point where I can maybe check off the box that I've gone from data-driven to value-driven, because now I'm understanding, because even when I bring these things together, when I bring in the AI, ML, and the human empowerment, it's all around how do I create value. And value, by the way, is ultimately defined by the customers and how they are using the system, how they're getting value. And so to me, the journey never ends, but you started reaching the value point when everything you're trying to do starts by how do we create value for our customers, and what are the KPIs and metrics against which we're going to measure their success and our success. That natural teeter-totter effect of how do you make sure your customers are successful while you got to make a profit too. You got to make money. So it's a very teeter-totter effect, a seesaw effect, right? That goes on. And the challenge is there is never equilibrium. It's always going like this. The world changes. The pandemic comes, crunk, right? Russia invades Ukraine, crunch, right? It's always shifting. So you have to have that culture of both AI and ML data-driven, but human innovation driven that can continuously learn and adapt no matter what is being thrown at you from a cultural, environmental, economic, political perspective.
Yeah, and I think again a point well made. It's not a destination really, and it's you probably know you're getting there when you start to see people thinking differently, behaving differently, even feeling differently, energized by the potential. You spoke about earlier someone turning around at one of your events saying it isn't about the data, it's how can we monetize, how can we create value through data. And when you start hearing those conversations, I think you're turning a corner really. And I know also, Bill, and I know when I first started following you, and I think maybe Doug Laney was also involved in the area, sort of, the economic value of data. Can you tell us a bit about that? In terms of what that means, but maybe also how we determine that economic value of data.
Well, let's start with a really basic understanding. What is economics, right? Economics is about the creation and distribution of wealth and value. And economics is different than accounting. For example, let's say that I got an Uber driver here, I got me, and we both go out to buy a $30,000 car. From an accounting perspective, that car is worth $30,000 to both of us. From an economics perspective, that $30,000 car isn't worth anywhere near $30,000 because it's sitting out in my driveway just getting dusty. However, the Uber driver is using that $30,000 car to create value, hauling passengers, using Uber Eats and hauling product, right? Even when they're not using the car, they're leasing it out to friends who are using the car when they're not using it. So there's a very different mindset. Accounting is a value in exchange valuation process, which says the value of an asset is what you paid for it. Okay. And there are people who really are focused on that and trying to figure out how do I get data on the balance sheet to reflect the value of a company. That's great. That's not where I'm focused. Economics is a value in use valuation methodology, which means the value of an asset is determined by what value you get from it. So if I apply an economics mindset to data, that value is generated in how I use data, if value is generated in how I'm optimizing these use cases. So a use case might be customer retention, customer acquisition, cross-sell, upsell, advocacy, right? You can start thinking about all these use cases. I can use data to actually improve the outcomes for those, and I can quantify in many cases how the use of the data drives those outcomes. So there's attributable value to the data, but here's the beauty. Here's the real power. Once I have a data set put into a centralized, data lake somewhere, I can reuse that data set an infinite number of times at zero marginal cost. So if I'm using point of sales data linked to my customer loyalty data to drive customer retention, customer acquisition, customer cross-sell, upsell, customer advocacy, I'm getting all these, the second, third, and fourth use cases are giving me value and it's costing me nothing. This is the game-changing aspect of it. I have this digital asset, data, never depletes, never wears out, can be used across an unlimited number of use cases at zero marginal cost. We don't have any assets that look like that. I don't care if we try to figure, I don't really care personally if it goes on a balance sheet. And I think the smartest companies out there aren't worried about if it goes on a balance sheet. They're worried about how do I apply it to that next use case to drive value? Because I get to use that data over and over for free. Oh, but wait, there's one more thing. If I can integrate AI and ML into this process, I can now build assets that continuously learn and adapt. And if those assets are being used, those analytic assets are being used across any of these use cases, anytime I make an improvement of that analytic asset that improves use case A, it improves all these other use cases at zero marginal cost as well. It is literally free beer. It's free money. Mm-hmm. But it's because data has this unique economic aspect. So the book talks about how do you build an organization? How do you build a data and analytics capability? How do you think about the use case approach that allows you to exploit these unique economic characteristics of data and analytics to really drive the digital transformation of the organization? Mm.
Wow. Yeah. And I'm just keeping an eye on the clock as well, Bill. It's a funny question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. you've I suppose you've had a very productive career, as we said earlier. There's 4 books, etc. What are the contributions to the data discussion that you've contributed that you're proudest of, Bill?
I don't know.
Mm.
I hope it's around. It's a value conversation, not a data conversation. I think that's one of the things I champion. I'm a big believer in this economics conversation because for the first time, I now have a vehicle where I can go and talk to a CEO and their language around economics. But I think maybe the biggest contribution is trying to make certain that everybody understands that they too can learn to think like a data scientist, that they can become citizens of data science, and that no matter what profession you're in, that you will can leverage data and analytics to improve that. I have a son who is a sports scientist who uses data and analytics to help the performance of his athletes he works with. I have a son who is a police officer who uses data and analytics to help identify where crime is and how to help prevent crime before it happens. I have a daughter who's going to go into digital marketing who's also taking data analytics because marketing is all about data and analytics. So you don't need to be a data scientist to get the benefits of what data science does. So anyway.
And maybe then, Bill, and this is me, and I hadn't pre-thought this, but maybe a very big contribution you've made is really about making data science far more accessible to a far bigger audience. So bringing it to the CEO, like you said, also maybe bring it to the business where we're democratizing data science, removing some of that fear, changing some of the wording, the language around it. And I think that's a very, very, and has been a very powerful, I suppose, value to the data community, because I think it was so important that we broke through silos, boundaries, and brought it really truly into the business. So maybe that's a big part of your contribution to our community.
I like that. I wrote it down because I've never really thought about it. I don't do this trying to put a mark out there, so to speak. I do this because I love to learn. And I find that the more I engage in this topic, the more I tend to learn. The reason why I teach, there's 2 reasons why I teach. First off, to be able to teach a topic, you really have to understand it well. Because I always tell my students when the class starts, I said, if I explain a topic and you don't understand it, then that's on me. But if I explain a topic that you don't understand and you don't let me know, that's on you. And it's that second part is where I learn. I'll explain a concept and they'll be like Tom Hanks in the movie Big, right? I don't get it. Professor Schmarzo, I don't get it. That's where I get a chance to learn. It's okay. Well, what don't you? Let's just drill into that, because I'm, while I've got no time for green bananas in my life, right? I'm approaching that part of the spectrum. I'm still just hungry to learn more and more about what's going on in the space, and it is so interesting. There's so much stuff happening in this space that it's just a blast to be involved in this. So.
And what is your next contribution? What's the thing you're really looking forward to doing next, Bill? What should we be watching out for?
Paidi, I don't really know.
So it's back to it's a journey. Let's take it one turn at a time.
Yeah, I can't look around the corner and see what's going to pop up next. I don't know. I know I like what I do. I love working with customers because it's a source of inspiration, a source of ideation. I learn, I talk to customers. I love teaching. Same reason, when you hang around younger people, or even people who are older who are trying to learn, it's inspiring, and the conversations you have, you learn from them. So I don't know what's around that corner. Maybe I'm afraid to look around the corner. I may not like what's around that corner, but you're right. It's a journey, and that's the beauty of what we do, right, Paidi? It's we just kind of go and we follow what we think is our true north. We do things we love to do. We try to be honest with ourselves and honest with people around us. And whatever life throws at me, I'm going to take and see if I can figure out how to riff with that
That's right. And back to, I suppose, this growth mindset. There's an excitement that comes from that, knowing what's around the corner, and always, I suppose, reaching out for the next and the bit and whatever is beyond that. Again, Bill, it's been fantastic. But where can people find more about you, Bill? I know where I find you, but for others that are will be listening, watching this, where can they find out more about you, Bill?
So there's obviously I'm very active on LinkedIn, and we have lots of great conversations on LinkedIn. I have published a series of 5 to 7 minute videos on YouTube, part of my big data MBA class curriculum that covers certain concepts. So YouTube is going to have some good stuff on me. And I do have a website called the deanofbigdata.com where I've posted some things on there, some fun infographics and things. But that's, between YouTube and LinkedIn and, my deanofbigdata.com website, that you probably find me hanging around all the regular places. I like hanging around where people hang around, because that's where I get a chance to interact and learn.
That's right, yeah. And I think you're known for videos probably on streets and strange positions, at strange times, Bill. But they're absolutely fantastic. I know we refer a lot of people to your content, whether that's YouTube, LinkedIn, etc. And I'd really recommend it to people watching here to reach out to you, Bill, and because I think, again, it's very important. If we want to make a difference in this space, this is the sort of content we need to be looking. So, Bill, I really want to say thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure catching up with you. I know I've written a lot of notes here again that will be very valuable going forward.
Me too. I did as well. It was great. I'm eager to have a Guinness with you the next time I'm over in Ireland.
That's a must, and things have gotten in the way, Bill, but and I know you've a love for this side of the Atlantic, so we will definitely meet up, and who knows, maybe we'll organize a bit of an event around it as well while you're over, and it'll be an excuse for going to the local as well for a few pints. Bill, Take care of yourself.
Thanks, Paidi. It's been great. Thank you very much.